and gentlemen, thank you guys for joining me. It is week 17. We've made it. If you are still alive and pushing for that championship, congratulations. Let's go get it together. It is Tuesday, which means we have quarterbacks, kickers, and running backs coming at you. Tomorrow is tight ends, defenses, and wide receivers. If you guys are new to the channel, welcome. Please consider liking and subscribing. It means so much to me. It helps me out a ton. We've got to our 100 goal. We are pushing for 2. If you guys have any start or sit questions, please drop those down below or reach out to me on Sleeper. I am available there as well. I want to be able to help you out as best I can. In today's video, we're going to go over the top 24 options at quarterback for those of you in 2 QB and Superflex leagues, which everyone should be a part of. We're also going to go over the top 12 kicker options available in week 17. I'm going to cover some notable omissions in each of these categories as well and let you know why I do not feel like they need to be in your lineups or made the cut. With that all said, done, and out of the way, let's get into week 17's quarterback rankings. At the top spot, my number 1 quarterback of the week, it is Josh Allen at home against Atlanta. Allen showed up in a massive way in the Bills' biggest game of the season, finishing as a top 3 quarterback on the week. He has 9 touchdowns in his last 3 games and has not dropped outside of the top 7 in that span. Atlanta allows the 3rd most points per game to the position, so get your popcorn ready. Moving on to number 2, it is Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau against my Vikings. Rodgers has caught fire over the last 5 games. He has 1,503 yards and 17 touchdowns in that time. He was the QB2 overall the last 2 times that these guys met up, and with the number 1 overall seed in the NFC within reach, he is not about to slow down now. Minnesota is also bottom 10 in every defensive passing category that you can think of, so a monster incoming game from Rodgers is of certainty. Patrick Mahomes travels to Cincinnati. He is in at 3. And in his last 2 games, Mahomes has 6 touchdowns and 668 passing yards. He's finished at the top 5 in both of those games. He has caught fire exactly when the Chiefs need him to, and they will continue that torrid pace against a Bengals team that just allowed Josh Johnson to throw for over 300 yards. Matthew Stafford is my 4th ranked player. He travels to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. Stafford laid a giant egg last week against Minnesota. He barely scraped by with a top 24 finish, and he threw 3 interceptions. I am back on him this week against Baltimore, though, as the Ravens just got absolutely torched, and they have a secondary that right now consists of players that have been signed off of the street. He could easily have the best day of all the quarterbacks, just like Joe Burrow did last week against these Ravens. Rounding out my top 5, and at home against the New York Jets, it is Tom Brady. It wasn't a big performance against Carolina, as Brady really didn't need to do much against the Panthers, but it wasn't the week 15 stinker either. We know that the GOAT owns the Jets, and I have a feeling he makes a statement for the Bucs, who should be healthier at wideout this week. The running game got its turn last week. Brady heats up through the air against the Jets. He has just 1 touchdown in his last 2 games. He's going to triple that number here. Moving on to number 6, it is Jalen Hurts, who travels to Washington to take on the football team. And with just 7 yards rushing last week against New York, Hurts was probably lucky to finish as the week's QB 14. The last time that these 2 teams met up was week 15, and Hurts was the week's QB 3. No one allows more points per game to the position than Washington does, so he is going to push for a top 5 finish, and he should be more mobile too. In at 7, staying at home against the Broncos, it is Justin Herbert. And well, it looks like Los Angeles chargered it again, inexplicably losing to the hapless Texans in a near must-win situation. They have their work cut out for them this week against Denver, as Herbert contends with a top 6 defense both in yards per game over their last 3 and points allowed to the position on the season. Herbie hasn't dropped out of the top 10 since week 10 though, so he's not going to do it here. Dak Prescott is my 8th ranked player. He stays at home against Arizona in a monster game with NFC playoff implications. Prescott finally got right after a 3-week lull. He showed that top 3 ceiling that I talked about in last week's video. Arizona allows just over 15 points per game to the position, which is 4th best in the league. However, they've given up 8 touchdown passes over their last 3, and I think Prescott capitalizes on that second bit. At home against Kansas City, Joe Burrow is my 9th ranked player. In a historic effort, Burrow set the Bengals passing record with 525 yards against a bitter division rival, throwing 4 touchdowns as the top scorer at the position in Week 16. This game might be even bigger, and the defense is certainly better, but I think that there are plenty of points to score here. Burrow hasn't thrown a pick in 3 weeks. He will have to try and match Mahomes, and that will lead to a big game. Traveling to Dallas and taking on the Cowboys at 10, it is Kyler Murray. It was not a great game for the Cardinals or really Kyler Murray either, but his 74 yards on the ground helped propel him to the QB 6 overall finish. He has 59 rushing yards or more in 3 out of his last 4. Dallas is a brutal matchup. They allow the 6th fewest points per game to passers, so while I'm a bit wary of him here, I believe a turnaround starts for Arizona, and it is led by Kyler. All the way up at number 11, it is Trey Lance in a home matchup with Houston. I am aggressively ranking Trey this week for a few reasons. Lance was a top 20 finisher in his lone start of the season, and that was against a red-hot Arizona Cardinals defense back in Week 5. He's had plenty of time to learn and grow since then, and Houston does not present the same challenge, to say the least. I believe he has legit top 8 upside this week, and I doubt that the wheels come off either. So if you're in need of a streamer, look no further. Rounding out my QB1s for Week 17, I have Russell Wilson here against Detroit at home. Now, Wilson struggled mightily against Chicago, but I'm going to put part of that on the weather conditions in Seattle. He still was able to hobble together a top 15 finish, and I am not a believer that the Lions are going to come out firing once again like they did last week. Russ is going to make it 2 touchdowns in 5 out of his last 6 after this game with Detroit. Next up at 13, it is Taysom Hill with a home matchup against the Carolina Panthers. With top 4 finishes in 2 out of his last 3 games, there is plenty to be hopeful for in a return from Hill. However, the last time we saw him, he was getting slaughtered by a Tampa Bay front 7 that absolutely decimated him en route to a QB 26 finish. Now, Carolina, they have a top defensive front of their own, so he is the definition of a boom or bust option against the Panthers. In at 14, it is Lamar Jackson in a home matchup with the Rams. And I'm not even sure a peak Lamar Jackson could save this reeling Ravens squad as the injuries and the losses continue to pile up. If he does go, it is fair to assume that his mobility is limited, and I don't like that one bit against this brutal Rams front. Traveling to Green Bay to take on the Packers at 15, it is Captain Kirk Cousins. I am down on Cousins a bit this week for obvious reasons. The Vikings play a must-win situation. They're on the road and they are against a division rival. Cousins has not exactly been the guy who wins when it matters. The upside is certainly there as he finished as the QB 6 the last time that these two met up, but considering the weather that is likely to be there and his history as a big game producer, or not so much, I am not confident that he steps up. My Sweet 16 is Ryan Tannehill at home against Miami. No one was more happy to see A.J. Brown return to action than Tannehill, who threw more than half of his attempts to the returning star. Brown increases Tannehill's chances of a solid effort, but Miami's defense has been absolutely stellar during their historic run, and they've given up the 2nd fewest points to the position over the last 2 weeks. He isn't going to fall flat, but he is not likely to crack this ranking either. He hasn't done that since back in Week 8. In at 17 and traveling to Tennessee to take on the Titans, it is Tua Tagovailoa. And Tua was struggling mightily last week against a fearsome Saints defense. He put up his worst showing since the season started. But he should be able to rebound nicely against a Tennessee Titans team that is allowing top 10 numbers to the position on the year. They've allowed just 1 passing touchdown in the last 3 weeks though, so there's certainly a bit of risk. In at 18, Justin Fields stays home to take on the Giants. Prior to missing last week's game, Fields had put up back-to-back top 10 performances. We do not have a ton of clarity on his health just yet, so this is a situation that needs to be monitored closely. The Giants have allowed 6 passing touchdowns over their last 3, and that increases his ceiling quite a bit. Moving on to 19 and traveling to Indianapolis, it is Derek Carr. The Colts are a top 10 defense in yards allowed through the air in their last 3, but have surrendered the second most passing touchdowns on this season. Carr has not been able to get inside the top 20 in the last 4 weeks either, but I think that Vegas struggles on the ground and they need to air it out plenty in order to keep up. If Darren Waller returns, it would be absolutely huge for the Raiders. To 20, and rounding it out, I have Taylor Heinicke in a home matchup with the Eagles. While it is clear that Dallas is Heinicke's kryptonite, he has been solid against everyone else in the last 10 weeks. Philadelphia ranks top 10 in both passing yards and touchdowns allowed in their last 3, and that severely limits Mr. Bud Lightke's ceiling, but I think his floor pays off this ranking. Mac Jones sits here at 21 and he gets Jacksonville at home. This is a sneaky tough matchup for Jones, and I feel like the Patriots are going to keep the ball on the ground as much as they possibly can. Jacksonville allows the second fewest yards through the air over their last 3 games and have surrendered just 3 passing scores in that span. Jones has alternated off and on weeks over the last 6 weeks, so maybe he keeps that up and produces big, but keep your expectations low. Big Ben Roethlisberger is in at 22. He has a home matchup with Cleveland. What an epic collapse from Pittsburgh, who not only lost the game, but what looked like their competency as a team as well, in an embarrassing performance against Kansas City. Cleveland has allowed the 10th most passing yards over their last 3, but it's hard to have much confidence in this offense after last week's showing. To 23, it's Jared Goff traveling to Seattle. Prior to missing last week's game against Atlanta, Goff had finishes in the top 8 in 2 out of 3. While we know that his floor can completely kill you, we haven't seen that since back in week 10. Seattle has allowed the 2nd most passing yards in the league. My last QB2 of the week is Baker Mayfield. He travels to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. And with 3 straight finishes inside the top 20, Baker continues to be an option for owners who are desperate at the position. He has 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and while the interceptions hurt, he's done enough to make himself a viable streamer play based on his floor. Let's get into my notable omissions. The first one is Zach Wilson. He's got a home matchup against Tampa Bay. Wilson snuck into my rankings last week for the first time and absolutely balled out, finishing as the QB4 overall, in large part due to his 91 yards on the ground. That is not going to be the case against Tampa Bay, who is going to make it a miserable afternoon for the rookie. Do not chase the points, leave Wilson on your bench. The next player I am looking to avoid in week 17 is Matt Ryan traveling to Buffalo. With back-to-back top 20 finishes, Ryan is back on the QB radar, but not against the Bills, who creamed Mac Jones last week, and he finished with just 145 yards while completing less than 50% of his passes. Do not risk it here with Ryan and look for help elsewhere. Davis Mills is the last omission that I have. He travels to San Francisco to take on the Niners. Mills has been extremely solid. Over the last 3 weeks, he's quietly finished within the top 15 on every occasion. The 49ers, however, present a far less inviting matchup, and I believe that that streak ends here. With quarterbacks done, let's get into week 17's kickers. Nick Folk gets my number 1 spot. He's got a home matchup with the Jaguars. He has definitely done me wrong in back-to-back weeks, but I am going back to the well one final time against the Jags. They allow over 9 points per game to the position, which is 3rd most in the NFL. My second spot is Matt Gay. He travels to Baltimore, who just got absolutely creamed. They're giving up plenty of points, and they will here again. To 3, it is Tyler Bass at home against Atlanta. The Bills are riding high after a huge win against New England, and they carried that momentum on as they crush the Falcons. There are going to be plenty of opportunities here for Bass. Jake Elliott is my 4th ranked kicker. He's got a road matchup with the football team. Rounding out my top 5, I have Ryan Suckup, who travels to New York to take on the Jets. In at 6 is Greg Zuerlein in a home matchup with the Cardinals. After the way that the Cowboys offense looked last week, this ranking might be too low for Zuerlein, but he has not finished inside of it since back in week 6, so for me, it is appropriate. Michael Bagley is my 7th ranked kicker in that matchup with Vegas. And at 8, I have Matt Prater traveling to Dallas. I think we see plenty of points in this game, and the Cardinals are now in near desperation mode. Their offense is going to step up and give Prater plenty of work. To 9 we go. It's Harrison Butker traveling to Cincinnati, and rounding out my top 10, I have Evan McPherson in that same game against the Chiefs. I believe this one is another high-scoring affair. Both teams move the ball, and the last team with it probably ends up winning this game. To 11, it's Mason Crosby in a home matchup with my Vikings, and rounding out my options at 12, it's Robbie Gould with a home matchup against the Texans. I have a feeling about Trey Lance this week, and the Niners shouldn't struggle to move the ball. Gould hasn't had a top 12 finish since week 12, but the last time he finished outside the top 20 was when he did that, and history tends to repeat itself. A couple notable omissions on the cusp of being playable start with Dustin Hopkins in a home matchup with Denver. With top 6 finishes in 3 out of his last 4 games, it seems like an obvious start for Hopkins. I just have concerns with how this team showed up against Houston, and the Broncos allow the 9th fewest points per game to the position. The other is Greg Joseph on the road in Lambeau, and with top 10 finishes in 3 out of 4. I wouldn't blame you if you started Joseph. I just have a bad feeling about this week for the Vikings. The Packers allow the 4th fewest points per game to the position as well, and that certainly doesn't help. And that'll do it for week 17's quarterback kicker rankings video. I really appreciate you guys joining me for it. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. If you guys have any start or sit questions, drop them down below. Reach out to me on Sleeper, whatever works best for you. I would love to be able to support you. If you are new to the channel, if you haven't done it yet, please consider liking and subscribing. It means so much to me. It helps me out, enables me to do what I love, so I can keep bringing you guys the content that you love. It is week 17. It is championship week, so let's make sure we ask all the questions we can, get as much help as possible so we don't make any mistakes that we look back on and regret. This is Relentless Press. I'm your host, Abraham Opatz, and we'll see you next time.